Attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces in Krasnogorivka. The Ukrainians are retreating in Semyonovka. The Russians are advancing in Tonenkoye. Heavy fighting continues to the north and west of Avdiivka. As we expected, the Ukrainians undertook one or more reconnaissance in force north of Petroskoye and northwest of Krasnohorivka, relying on Ocheretino and Novokalinovo. Black small square. Judging by the footage of the attacks on the advanced groups of Ukrainians, earlier the armed forces of Ukraine were able to occupy part of the landing southeast of the Zarya SNT, but could not advance far. Attempts to advance were thwarted by fire from the Russian army. One of the assault groups was covered by a Soln Sepik at the time of advancement or rotation, and the landing of troops from an infantry fighting vehicle was covered by a mortar. In addition, a tank operates at night near the landing site. It has not yet been caught. The very fact that Ukrainian fighters are attempting to advance in this area should not come as a surprise, since pressure on the northern flank of the Russian army units advancing to the west helps at least gain time for organizing defense in Semyonovka and to the west. Black small square. The situation in Berdichi and Orlovka remains difficult. There are oncoming battles, but neither side is able to take full control over the populated areas. Most of Orlovka is occupied by the Russian army, and Berdichi by the Ukrainian armed forces. In the Tonenkoye area, Russian troops continue to try to advance, which is confirmed by enemy footage of kamikaze drone attacks on armored vehicles carrying troops. Despite the fact that at least several pieces of equipment were damaged during the attack, the very fact of movement in this area makes it possible to determine the absence of enemy forces in the plantings and farms to the west of the village. To the west of Donetsk, heavy fighting is taking place in Krasnogorivka, where Russian soldiers are trying to advance in armored groups with landing troops. Despite the initial advance in the south of the settlement, significant success has not yet been achieved. By transferring the reserve, the enemy first stopped the assault groups in the area of the railway, and then partially squeezed out Russian forces from the private sector in the south of the city. The presence of Russian fighters remains on the southeastern outskirts in the area of Geological Street and the forest belt near the railway track and warehouse. At the same time, strikes by FABs with UMPC continue on the territory of the Krasnogorovsky refractory plant, on which the enemy relies in the defense of the city. Apparently, this is partly what prevents the Ukrainian armed forces from completely ousting the Russian army from a populated area. In this situation, it is likely that the Russian army could launch an attack towards the city from neighboring Staromykhailivka, but this is associated with obvious difficulties in the form of well-organized enemy defense in the forests and OLKI and high-rise buildings on the eastern outskirts of Krasnogorivka.